In this lecture, we're going to cover deployment and implementation of HR analytics findings. So this is the last step in the HR analytics project lifecycle, and this is the step in which we deploy and implement anything that we've interpreted and found based on those data analyses and the way we've managed the data, how we've acquired the data, and it should all link back to those initial questions and hypotheses that we generated during that question formulation phase of the HR analytics project lifecycle. So what are we talking about when we're talking about deployment and implementation? Well, we're really talking about a process of either prescribing or actually taking action based on our interpretation of the findings. And so this is going to require an understanding of stakeholder needs, an understanding of the business context, as well as knowledge of change management processes. So the best way to illustrate this is through an example. So let's take this generic scenario where let's assume that we have this new training program that we've developed, and now we've piloted it with a small group of employees, and we're trying to evaluate it. In other words, we have maybe, let's say, we've administered a post-test where some employees took this new training program and some didn't, and we're trying to see whether or not there's significant differences between the people that received the training and didn't receive the training with respect to whatever type of key outcome or target outcome we were focusing on there. And let's assume, for the sake of explanation here, that the findings indicate that the training program is actually quite effective for improving targeted outcomes. And so then the next question becomes, well, what do we actually do with this? And this is where deployment and implementation considerations come in. So you're going to ask yourself a series of questions. For example, in this training evaluation project example, one, you want to start with, well, how are we going to justify the value of this? Okay? So in other words, yeah, the training seems to work, but how much does it seem to work? How important are these targeted outcomes that it's apparently able to move or improve? Are these key performance indicators or closely linked to them? How closely linked are they to important strategic objectives or as well as business outcomes that we might be interested in within the organization? So we want to carefully evaluate not only whether or not these are improving certain outcomes, but also what are some of the costs and potential benefits, whether indirect or direct, that we might experience by implementing this new training program. Because this is going to be part of the messaging and storytelling that's going to go hand in hand with deploying and implementing this, and to convince stakeholders that it's worthwhile to invest and to engage in this new training program. Now, in addition, you might ask yourself this question, well, who actually needs this new training program? And this comes down to efficiency. You obviously don't want people taking a training program that it's not applicable to. So trying to understand who actually needs the training, and maybe this goes back to a needs assessment that you did early on where you found that, yeah, in fact, when we looked at the person analysis, we looked at the task analysis, sure enough, there were some gaps where certain pockets or groups of employees needed additional skills or knowledge in order to be proficient in their job or to be proficient in some new piece of technology or some change to the job that they're working in. Now, another question you might ask is there a perceived need for the training? That is, do people who are going to be potential trainees, as well as their managers and other levels of people in the company, actually believe that there's a need for this training? Well, that's going to be really, really important as part of deployment and implementation. The research generally shows that people are going to have more effective outcomes and are going to learn more during the training program and be more motivated to learn if they perceive there's a need for actually engaging in it. Plus, this is important for when people finish the training. Are their supervisors and their managers actually going to encourage them to apply what they've learned in the training on the job? So you want to think very carefully about who are all the people that could be potentially impacted with this, and who do we need to convince or persuade that these findings are relevant? Now, in addition, we might ask ourselves the question, what are the costs and benefits of this program? And this really gets back to that justification of the value of the program. And so we want to do a careful cost-benefit analysis and consider, okay, what is this training really doing for us in the short term, the long term, and what are those direct costs and indirect costs? And then finally ask ourselves, what type of resistance can we expect, and by which groups, or maybe everybody? So resistance to change is to be expected. Anytime you're introducing something new, probably someone stands to gain, someone stands to lose, or people have a perception that it's not going to be successful, that they're going to fail, and so forth. So we want to think really carefully about this, because managing change effectively can really help counteract any resistance that we might encounter. And the best solution is to try to anticipate any resistance and meet it head on, and then figure out a way to move forward from that point. So again, When we think about the HR Analytics project lifecycle, deployment and implementation is really one of the final phases. And after we finish deployment and implementation, it might actually lead us to more questions. And this might lead us right back into the beginning of the HR Analytics project lifecycle again, in which we start posing new questions and hypotheses based on what we've learned through deployment and implementation. Using that training evaluation example again, perhaps the question that's raised is, okay, this training seems to be really effective in moving these target outcomes, but can we do it more efficiently? Can we do it with fewer resources? Can we do it in a shorter amount of time? Instead of having an in-person trainer, can we have an online trainer? Does it need to be synchronous or can it be asynchronous? And thinking of ways that you could maybe scale it outward to the rest of the employees in a more efficient way. So this wraps up the lecture on deployment and implementation.